Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. I'm your host. My name is Shane, and we're going to talk some old stuff. Really old stuff. Or moderately old stuff. We'll figure it out along the way. What's going on, everybody? Hope that you're doing well. Tuna, what's going on, man? How are ya? Hope that the West Coast is cooler than it is here because, good gosh, it's still in the 90s. I could do with some not 90-degree weather. That'd be friggin' great. If I'm just being honest, it's still sweltering here, and I don't think it's going to cool down anytime soon. I think we're just going to just roll on with summer and just get fall a go and maybe have fall for winter and then just go right back into summer come like March. Because obviously we're moving into a tropical climate. Crazy times, crazy things, right? Come and visit and experience the upper 80s. Well, it did rain yesterday, and after it rained, it got down to about 88, 87. Right? But that means that it was like 88 or 87 with a bajillion % humidity. And, that it's just like walking through pea soup. It's just not the best. I really hope that we eventually get a fall. We had a nice fall last year. Heavy potato breathing. Lumpy, are you exercising, or are you just excited about the heat? It rained twice this year. It was national news. Yeah, you guys got a hurricane this year. That's interesting. You all getting a hurricane and us not having one. That's just weirdness, right? That's kind of crazy. You're coping with real life. I'm Spartacus. Why are my alerts so low? I'm Spartacus. There is still time, that's for sure. Tuna, thank you so much for the gift sub to Brittany. You are a kind and generous individual, and it is much appreciated. That gift sub will go towards fixing our water heater, which needs to be fixed. Because, every time it seems like we got everything going, and it's like, hey, remember that other thing that you need to fix? Pay hundreds of dollars for that. Hopefully it's not as bad as I fear it will be, but I suspect that we will be paying several $100s in order to get a new water heater, because I think that the one that we have might be dead. But we'll see. We gotta call the plumber. Yeah, that'll be tomorrow. Yep. Fun times. Fun times. I think you can replace it yourself. Yeah, maybe. But that's a big task. Yours was 1,000. Oh, that's 1,000 Canadian dollars. That's only like 700 or 800 American dollars. Looking forward to the Brett Kavanaugh session of this lesson. I don't get the joke, Fall Machine. I apologize. I'm going to be very slow on the uptake tonight. I am very tired. I did not sleep very well last night, and today was very busy. So it's like double whammy. I guess we could think about replacing it ourselves. When did I last see the news? This morning at about 7:30. Has something big happened and I've completely missed it? Is Brett Kavanaugh in trouble? Should I look at the news real quick? I don't see anything on my headlines. Um, I see New York judge finds Donald Trump liable for fraud, which, okay. And I'm assuming that's going to end up in the Supreme Court. I see Senate reaches spending deal to head off government shutdown, but I don't know if that's actually going to work. I see Hunter Biden sues Giuliani for spreading information from laptop. That'll be interesting. New Orleans drinking water threatens saltwater intrusion looms. Some senators are calling for Bob Menendez to quit. Biden says the UAW should fight for a 40% pay rise. That's extensive. Cassidy Hutchinson, second Republican debate. Supreme Court rejects Alabama's redistricting appeal. I guess I should just search Brett Kavanaugh, huh? Brett Kavanaugh's whoopsie forces Groundhog Day at the Supreme Court. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court set the stage for blah, blah, blah. Yada, yada, yada. Can we just get to it? Oh, he said you should argue things this way, and then they did say, oh, we did argue it that way, and then they still said no. I don't have the capacity right now to try to process things. I apologize. I'll have to read stuff when I'm in a better frame of mind. Or if somebody can just, like, give me the too long didn't read version, that'd be great. Okay, anyway, this is a viewer request night. We're talking about calendars. Specifically, we're going to look at Western calendars because as I began to work on making the outline for this discussion, what I realized was that there's too much to talk about in one stream, and I couldn't put all of the stuff that I wanted to talk about into the stream and still have it come out within the time frame. So we are going to be talking about history of calendars, but we're going to be talking about it from a Western perspective. Most basically, how did we get the calendar that we use today in most of the world? So effectively, this is the history of the Gregorian calendar, if you want to call it that, or the history of Western calendars, which is what I've titled the discussion. Brett brought his calendars to his confirmation hearings to prove he didn't assault a woman. Oh, I see. That's interesting. I know that the hearings were rather tumultuous, and I'll be honest and say that I assumed that the vast majority of them were going to be political theater, so I mostly just read the transcripts. So I must have missed the bringing the calendars from college. So why do you still have calendars from college, though? Like, do you keep those in case you are ever blamed for assault? That's weird. That's weird. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't even use calendars, so I'm way off in the deep end on this. I don't even know it's the 26th. I didn't know that until I looked. So, I mean, that makes sense, Tropical. I'm just weird. Moose is just like, what is time? I don't even time. Who times anymore? Who has the time to time? That's a hard question to answer. All right, so let's start at the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I mean like the for real beginning. When did we even start holding on to a concept that time passed and that there was a repetition of a yearly cycle? How do we even begin to think about that? Well, if we look at calendars in a prehistoric fashion, there are a lot of things that people claim are calendars. And we're going to talk about some of these because I find them interesting. But it should be stated that nobody's really going to be able to prove that these are calendars because they're very friggin' old and we don't really know. Some of them have better claims than others, and I'll share my thoughts on them as we get there. So let's start with this guy. This is a photograph of a fairly famous bone fragment that's called the Dordogne bone fragment, or some people call it the Dordogne calendar. It looks like a bone with some notches and some holes in it, right? Right? Like we have these little holes and they're kind of in a line, and this one kind of does this thing. Now, a lot of people say that this is a lunar calendar. And the little holes that are drilled into this represent days or perhaps lunar cycles in a year. Now, that's a bit of a stretch, if we're just being honest. This dates to about 27,000 years ago. So 27,000 to 22,000 years ago, which is heckin' far back in time, right? What's up, KP? So are these little holes here really a calendar? Well, there are some people that say yes, and they even talk about why this particular shape exists, and they want to posit that this particular shape is the movement of celestial beings through the sky during different parts of the year. Specifically things like, rises of the moon on the horizon. My biggest question about that is how somebody 27,000 years ago going to get an accurate representation of that if they're moving around all the time, right? Because this is still way hunter-gatherer. There weren't even... we may have domesticated the dog by that point. And yeah, Moose, that's my thing. Maybe they were just using the bone as a tool for some reason, and the little holes are maybe something like sharpening something. I'm Spartacus. 36 months is 3 years. Holy crap. That's a lot. I'm Spartacus. And Moose is like, no, I'm Spartacus. KP, thank you so much. Not just for being a cool mod and hanging out in the chat, but for being a good friend. I don't know if you all know this. I've said it before in chat, but KP is my longest friend. He and I have been friends since we were like 3. Little. We were both little. And he's a good guy. KP is quite long, so you hear. I've got a... I don't know. He's a pretty tall... Well, I don't know. We could get into that stuff. Anyway. He's a good guy. Anyway. I think these are just holes in bone. I don't think this is a calendar. And I think that the people that are arguing that it is a calendar are perhaps trying really, really hard to find something to look for. Now, this made a lot of news last year, and carried over a little bit into the early part of this year. So if we look at certain cave paintings, there are some cave paintings where we will see these lines of dots, or these clusters of dots. See, lines of dots. Or these little hash marks. And some people want to say that these little dots, or these little hash marks, are lunar calendars. Like, look, this is a fish, and it's got 3 dots. So like the 3rd month of the year, this fish will be around. I think we're maybe reaching here as well. Now, there's a particular set of caves, the Lascaux caves, that are people got really excited about that. I don't have a photograph of it because I couldn't find a good one. And it's got a longer string of dots, even longer than this one. It's got about the one in the particular cave that I'm talking about has quite a long string that's about twice as long as this. And people are just convinced that they have broken the code, and that these little dots and that these little lines are actually representations of time. I don't think they are. These particular cave paintings and the claims of cave paintings go back about 15,000 years, so that's quite far back in our history. I'm not trying to say that people back then didn't know that there was a yearly cycle, but sometimes a marking is just a marking. Absolutely, they're just making sure there's ink in the pen. Tad, that's perfectly logical, right? Like, maybe, and this is a weird one, maybe they put big blobs of pigment on the wall and then use their finger to draw, and would go back and like touch and then draw a line, and touch and then draw a line, and then touch and then draw a line, and they just added more pigment as they needed, because they probably had to work this up along the way. They probably just didn't have a bucket of paint sitting around. But I don't know, right? We don't know these things. But you can find some people that get very convinced that these dots on the walls of caves are actually lunar calendars. Could be the artist's signature. Maybe so. Bob Ross nods in approval, right? Like happy little dots. Maybe. Now, here's another one. This is a satellite infrared image of a location in Scotland that's called Warren Field. And the little dots here are actually standing stones that were aligned along the edge of this ridge. And yeah, woohoo Scotland, right? This dates to about 8,000 years ago. Some people want to push it back to like 13,000 years ago, but I don't know. It's very hard to date a standing stone, right? There are methods that you can use, but it's not always super duper accurate. Anyway, some people call this the oldest calendar ever. And the idea here is that if you stand roughly about here in the field and you look at these stones, that the moon will rise above each of these during the course of the year, during the lunar cycle. We have concluded it's a rock. Right. Now, this one, to me, seems to be a little bit of a better claim. I don't know if that's exactly the way that it was. And I don't know if that's exactly why they put the rocks where they are. There's also the chance that, these have shifted over time, that people have moved them over time, that the rock may have been cut at a certain time period, and then later people found the rocks and moved them into the current location, so it's not as old as it seems. All of these things are just as likely, right? I feel like if you placed stones in a vague line or arc, the moon would rise over most of them over the course of a year. Well, so that's the thing, KP. The particular arrangement here is the important thing because they're along the line of a ridge, and there's another structure that's over here, kind of off to the side. And if you were to view the line from the structure, the moon is going to rise over the tops of them. So I didn't explain that very well. It's not necessarily just a line of standing stones. There is a secondary sort of excavation site with some other standing stone stuff down kind of over here. Yeah, so that one gets a little, I don't know, like it's moving towards like that could be that could be a thing. I don't know if it's a thing, but it could be a thing, right? It's moving towards something, I think, maybe. Then there's this thing, right? This is, of course, Stonehenge. A lot of people have come around to an idea that Stonehenge may have actually been originally a ritual site. Something that was just a location that was very important, and that over time it grew to become a seasonal site. And if we look at the actual megaliths that are involved in the creation of Stonehenge, it does look like a large portion of them were set up at one particular frame of time. There were some new results that came out in recent history. I think either at the end of last year or maybe at the beginning of this year. I can't remember exactly when the paper came out. That located the actual quarry where the rocks came from and posited with some good scientific backing that the rocks in especially like the big outer realm around the edge were all roughly quarried at the same time and set up in the same sort of effort. And what that means is that we can more easily ascribe the idea that they were set up with a specific purpose, right? If they had just been added slowly over time, yeah, you may be able to argue that people over the course of, 3,000 years sort of got the same idea and put some stuff down and sort of finished the structure. But if they were all done at the same time, this makes a much stronger argument for they put them up the way that they wanted them and they're designed the way that they want them. And one of the reasons why that helps a lot towards the argument that Stonehenge was actually built as a calendar is because there are quite a few astrological events that coincide with some of these standing stones during the year. For example, some of these big ones, you can see the sun rise between them on certain solstices. The rocks will also line where the sun goes down. So you have kind of a match where, the sun's going to rise right down the middle of this line. And then if you go to the other side on the winter solstice, it's going to set right down the same line as well. Now, that could just be a coincidence, but the fact that it lines up with multiple solar events is a pretty convincing argument, at least to me. I'm fairly convinced that Stonehenge originally started as a various type of religious symbol site, maybe even a site that was associated with miraculous events. There's a lot of interesting burials that happened around Stonehenge, people from quite a long distance away showing up. So one of the strong arguments that Stonehenge was a site of healing, but that actually does lend itself also towards the big stones being something more calendarish, because we know that one of the things that's frequently associated with miraculous events are astrological events. Like during the time of this thing, you can pray to this god and you can get, this event happen, right? So I like the idea that Stonehenge was a calendar. I don't think that it can be completely proven, but I think that it's a good idea, and the arrangement is a strong one for me. How far is Stonehenge from sites like Bath with mineral hot springs? That's a great question. So we can go to the map and figure that out. Doesn't look like it's too terribly far. It says that it's about 54 miles, which is probably a day's worth of travel, at least. At least, right? Oh, we can get the actual roundabouts and turn at this roundabout, take the second exit. Alright, so there's Bath. And down here Stonehenge, which has actually got roads all the way around it. And is a lot less of a outside in the middle of nowhere site than you think it is. It's actually pretty touristy. I'm pretty sure we can walk straight into this. Yeah. I'm surprised that they got it without a million people being involved. It's pretty friggin' cool. Stonehenge isn't even a true hinge. Well, it doesn't bend anywhere, if that's what you're after. If it was just a healing site, I was just curious how far it was from location. Yeah. There's a good connection there, right? When this thing happens in the sky, you can pray. To be fair, these viewers requested streams where one can make requests of Shane bear some relation to the phases of the moon. Yeah, that's fair too, right? Right. So Stonehenge is also a roundabout. There's one around it, right? Now, let me show you another one. And as we do this and zoom in, I'm going to put on the adventure hat. Also, hello Foggage, hello Tropical, and hello Frank Big Time. All right, so this is Poverty Point, and this location is a pretty freaking cool place, and I've put on the adventure hat because I've been here several times. And if we get over here at Poverty Point, there is this big circular thing here. Now, you can see it a little bit. I doubt that there are any on the ground pictures. Oh, cool. You can actually walk all the way around it. Interesting. So, if we're at Poverty Point, there's this big circle. And it's currently marked with these pylons that have cement in them. But originally, these had posts. So trees that they cut down and buried into the ground at particular intervals. And I just grabbed one of my photos from it. I didn't actually know that we were going to be able to walk all the way around it. It's a pretty cool sight. I really wish I could get this to go away. I don't want this to show up. Go away. Thank you. Can I go... Where's my full screen maps? Google Earth full screen. Excellent. There we go. Anyway, so this big thing right here is a circular post circle, timber circle. Some people call them wood hinges. But what's interesting here is that the posts themselves represent a circle, but the posts weren't... Yeah, I had to push some buttons. It's not a screen that I go to a lot. Apologies. Anyway, the posts are not equally distant, separated from each other. So, like, these two are a little bit closer than those two, and, like, that one's a little bit further away than that one. So, they're not evenly spaced. And they are in a nice round circle. So, what are we doing here? Now, there are a lot of theories. One of the theories is that what we're looking at is just a circle, right? It's just a circle. It was a meeting place. It was a festival place. It was just a circle. Now, that's cool, but some of the theories are that these big timber circles, which are found at other locations, might also be primitive calendars because of the spacing issues and where the sun would rise and set on certain days and where the moon would rise and set on certain days. There's some evidence that these might have been older concepts of how we kept time. One of the biggest pieces of evidence that we have towards this is actually a diary of a Spanish guy who is the only primary source that we have who witnessed a solar festival of a group of Native Americans, and it was held in one of these timber circles. Specifically, he didn't know exactly what it was, of course, because he had no cultural context for it. But the way that he describes it, it may have been a harvest ceremony, so perhaps, solstice related or equinox related or something like that. We don't 100% know because it's just this guy talking about it, but it's an interesting overlap. Can we say for sure? No, we can't. But Poverty Point was built before the pyramids. It's pretty old. So what are we getting from all of these things, right? What's the ultimate take from this stuff? What do we get out of this? Well, people knew that there was stuff going on. People knew that the world moved, or that the sky moved, or that something moved. And people knew that there was a loop, right? What's up, Green Herring? So we knew. But when did we actually start putting stuff down? When was the first real, okay, we're going to divide this year into a thing? When was that? Well, we're going to have to travel back over here to Mesopotamia for that. And we're going to have to look at the Sumerians. Sumerian calendar. This is the first one that really we can show actually tried to break down the year in a way that made repetitive sense, not just dots on a wall, or not just, hey, look, the sun rises at that spot at the same time every year. Not just, look, we build some nice posts in a circle. This is actually a calendar. And we can date this to around 2000-ish BC. Gozer the Gozerian approves, right? Right? This goes back to the 2000s, maybe as far back as 2200 BC. It's pretty hard to tell that far back because we don't have a lot of written evidence, but there are some hints, and we don't even really have a whole lot of copies of this. They didn't really write it down very frequently. We had to sort of interpret what it looked like based on later evidence and piecing it together backwards. But we do know that the Sumerian calendar, what's called a lunisolar calendar, which is based on both the phases of the moon and the cycle of the sun. Obviously, there are big issues with doing the lunar calendar. The moon cycles do not equal the solar calendar. If you're just going on phases of the moon, you're going to be looking at 30-day-ish cycles. And of course, the year doesn't add up. You have more year than you have lunar cycles. So this is why lunisolar, I keep saying solar. Lunisolar, it's hard to, these words are not easy and not frequently used, right? Lunisolar calendars have to have adjustments made to them. And the way that they do that is using something called an intercalary. And you're like, oh, is that just a special kind of calorie? Not like a burned calorie. This is CALARI, intercalary. And these are fancy little things where you add extra time in order to keep things caught up with the solar year. So we have one today, and it's called leap year. But back then, the Sumerians would have an entire leap month. They would have an intercalary month that they would add in about every 6 years, because if they're running purely on a lunar cycle, they're losing quite a few days every year. So every month or so, or I'm sorry, every 6 years or so, they're going to add a completely new month to the calendar. So it's an interesting approach to it. This is, again, the earliest that we can show people actually building this stuff in a way that kind of even makes sense. Now, the reason the Sumerian calendar is so important is because it's what's going to go ahead and be the basis of the Babylonian calendar. And the Babylonian calendar, this is a big one, right? It's pretty hard to tell that far back because there weren't calendars. Right, exactly. We don't even know. Did the women physiological events associated historically with the moon? Yeah, absolutely. That goes all the way back. I mean, lunatic. Our modern word lunatic is also lunatic, and it referred to people acting crazy on their periods. You're being weird. It's it's that lunatic period of your life, right? Also, hysteria goes along with that. That's not directly related to the phases of the moon, but like the concept that you're in hysterics is about women being crazy during their period. Histrionics, right? Like hysterectomy, same thing, right? I just blew your mind. Well, that's what we're here for, right? Luna Solaria, praise the moon. We're not on Moon, and we're definitely not hanging out with weird princesses that look exactly the same, right? What's up, Cliff? How's it going? Interesting thing about Sumerians, before we move on to the Babylonians, they didn't say that women were on their periods. Their phrase that they use in colloquial terms is they said that women had been struck by the weapon. So, if you get struck by a weapon, you bleed. So there's their euphemism for being on your period. Even the word period, right, refers to a specific length of time, which is obviously going to be, there you go. I probably know more about this than you might expect, but that's sort of that's Shane, right? You never know what you're going to get when you come into this place. We have a title, but you never really know. You never really know. Oh, yeah. Anyway, shameful behavior, that's a good one. I like that one a lot. The Babylonian calendar. We actually have quite a few of these. This is a remnant of a Babylonian calendar tablet. This is the one side of it and the other side of it. So this isn't two pieces. It's just like this is one side and this is the other side. But you can see here that they used a circular approach to dividing the year, and each one of these would have had a certain deity to which the period of time was associated. They would have been broken down into certain days. And it's also, I don't know how many people were around back when we first started doing viewer requests, and you might have been here when we did History of Astronomy. But the Babylonians were also the ones that really went a long way towards influencing our concept of things like zodiac signs. So their yearly cycle of the stars and the moon and the sun were also the template for all of our modern zodiac signs. Fossilized alien lungs. Exactly, Cave Geek. Exactly. Exactly. So Babylonian calendar was a big deal. Now, why was the Babylonian calendar such a big deal? It went on to influence tons and tons and tons of other people. So part of this was because Babylon was so important in the ancient scheme of things during the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, and part of this is also because their language was widely used as a language of trade. And this is also because their writing system that was developed in Mesopotamia became sort of the international alphabet. So if you know what cuneiform is, it's this little wedge-shaped writing stuff. That became the standard writing style for a lot of other nations, and you would adopt cuneiform, but you would write in your own language. So like we could write English words in cuneiform if we wanted to. It's just an alphabet. It's not an actual language itself. But because of the cultural value and the cultural pressure of the Babylonian world, their calendar is also going to get a lot of attention. Now, it is going to basically be the basis of our Western calendars. This is sort of where it starts. You get months that are divided into these weird sections. You have 3 weeks that have 7 days, and then you have another week that's got 8 or 9 days, and it kind of depends. It's a little bit weird to try to determine exactly how that worked originally. A lot of the stuff that we have from the Babylonian calendar is much later because it became, again, the standard and people used it for a long time, and they made adjustments to it along the way. Originally, it's a little bit hard to see how it was organized, but this is a pretty big one. It's also going to be the basis of another very important calendar, which pops up and even spreads into Asia, the Persian calendar. And we better hear about Shire Reckoning calendar in this episode, you're going to riot. Well, in the year 1600 of the Third Age, a particularly adventurous hobbit crossed the Brandywine River and established a sort of colony on the other side, and this is where we get the original Shire. And the Shire Reckoning is separate from the Third Age Reckoning by 1600 years, so the way that you get Shire Reckoning is take the Third Age and then subtract 1600. And they also had different sections of months. So each month in the Shire calendar has 30 days, and then they have intercalaries to adjust that every now and then. They have sort of a period of time that is just like a little bit of a holiday, right around Yule. But I won't go into all of that stuff. I could go so much deeper than that, because we all know that I'm a giant history nerd, but I also love Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien knew all of this stuff as well. Anyway, what's up with the Persian calendar? Persian calendar is a pretty big deal. It goes back about all the way to the 1000 BC mark with the Achaemenid dynasty, and it's going to be a little bit more accurate than the Babylonian calendar. It's going to be based on the Babylonian calendar, but it's a little bit more accurate. It's got 360 days. Got to sneeze. Sorry about that. Anyway, it's got 360 days. It's got 12 months, but it doesn't have weeks. Each month has a section of divisions based on the changing of the lunar phase within the month. So you have like 3 phases that might be varying in days depending on where the cycle of the moon is. So like, some months might have the first phase of the month and it's only like a day long or something like that, or 2 days long or something. And they use sporadic intercalary months to bring that back up to speed with the solar calendar. The solar aspect was actually pretty important for the Persian calendar because of the connection between Zoroaster and the sun. Not Zoroaster, Ahura Mazda, apologies. Zoroaster was the prophet that started it. Ahura Mazda is their chief god. That was a boneheaded decision on my part to say the wrong word. Anyway, Ahura Mazda, their main good force deity, is very frequently associated with the sun and fire, and a lot of his avatars like Mithras are of course very associated with the sun. So it was important for them to have a way to justify their calendar against the sun as well. And the months of the Persian calendar are wrapped up with deities, specifically Yazadas, who are kind of quasi-angelic interpretations of Ahura Mazda. Each one of the calendar months is named after them. So there we go. What's up, Maddie? What up, nerds? How's it going? The legendary and behind the legendary, right? Um, so that's about 1,000 or so BC. I should have specifically mentioned that the Babylonians are going to take over the Sumerian calendar around the 1800s BC, and they're going to widely begin to disseminate it from there. So Persia's a little bit after that, of course, because Persia is going to end up taking over that area after they kick out the Chaldeans. That's the Neo-Babylonians, and that's after the Bronze Age collapse. We've established the Iron Age toward the end of Iron Age. So there's that. Now, we also have a very important one called the Egyptian calendar. And the Egyptian calendar is going to be probably, if we're looking at Western history, because we're only looking at Western calendars tonight, it's the first one that really gets the year closer to being accurate. So we know that right now the length of the year is 365 days. So it's 365.2425. So it's not completely 364 and a quarter. But the Egyptian calendar was pretty close to that. They had it down to 365.25. And originally, if you go way, way, way back in Egyptian history, they were using a lunar calendar, but they switched to a solar calendar pretty early on, and a fairly accurate one at that. Potentially as far back as 2400 BC during the Old Kingdom. That's really, really far back in time. That would put it roughly contiguous with the Sumerian calendar. The issue with dating that is that we don't have a lot of evidence. We have a lot of speculative evidence and circumstantial evidence, but nothing particularly solid. There may have been some influence from Mesopotamia on the Egyptian calendar. We know that they were in contact with each other during the early part of the Iron Age. During the early part and middle part of the Bronze Age, especially like EB3, early Bronze Age period 3, which is like right at the end of the early Bronze Age. There's some contact between the two, so there may have been some astronomic mix. And we do know that especially the Egyptians were very familiar with the Babylonian calendar later on, because they're going to start adopting especially the zodiac signs, and they're actually one of the big people that transmit zodiac signs into Greece, but we'll get there in just a second. We suspect that they had a standard length for months, so like every month was about the same amount, and we suspect that as far back originally. Now, we do know that there were standardized versions of this that existed a little bit later on, especially by the time we get to like the New Kingdom of Egypt, which is where a lot of the really fancy, cool stuff happens, like the height of the Bronze Age and all that fun stuff. We do know that they had 12 months that were each 30 days of the year, and then they had this little 5-day month that was right at the end of the year, and each one of the days was dedicated to one of the chief gods. So Osiris had a day, and Isis had a day, and Set had a day, and Nephthys had a day. And it was sort of just like a festival month, right? If you conquer someone whose pantheon/calendar stories are more accurate to the year than yours, do you absorb their pantheon, or do you just mod the calendar stories to your own pantheon? Frank, that's a great question, and it really depends on which culture you're talking about. It's mostly going to depend on whether or not you have deities that line up, which a lot of them do, right? Just about everybody has a storm god and a war god and a harvest god and things like that. A god of the sun, a god of the underworld. How compatible the stories of the deities are is going to be important, though. Do they have the same sort of qualities? Is our underworld god an angry underworld god, or is our underworld god a guy that just got stuck in the underworld because some bad thing happened and he got stuck down there, right? What's interesting here is that it's more likely to line up if the stories are similar than if you have gods that do the same thing, right? So we might have a war god that's a guy, and your war god might be a woman, and that is probably not going to go well together. That doesn't mean that we don't have like deity syncretism between different genders of gods in history. We see that occasionally, but usually that doesn't happen too much. What is likely to happen if there were going to be situations where one culture conquered another person, it's much more likely that the dominant culture is going to enforce their calendar. They're just going to say, we've beaten you up, you're now following our calendar. And if it's a better calendar than the one that you had, if you ever regained your independence, you're probably going to keep the better calendar. Because you don't have to get rid of all of the good stuff. Maybe they had decent things. And we see this happen a lot, especially with stuff like, the Persian Empire spread a lot through Central Asia and spread their calendar out there, but Persia couldn't hold all of that. And when they collapsed, a lot of the people just kept the calendar. Same thing with Babylon. The Babylonians conquered the Egyptians and brought over a lot of their stuff. And the Egyptians sort of like, thanks, Esarhaddon. We're going to just put all of your cool stuff in our world. And they just adopted the cool stuff. They kept their gods, but they kept their calendar. So, I'm sure everybody knows that. So, if you don't know who Esarhaddon is, we talked about him. He's a pretty cool guy, though. I've seen pictures of him. Anyway, long story short, I'm sort of going off on a mental tangent here. Did they walk like Egyptians? Sometimes. But it's fair to note that not all Egyptians walked the same way. And even the walk like an Egyptian dance is a bit of a stereotype. Because we see lots of people walking in Egyptian motifs, and not all of them are doing the thing. Right? So, what up, Moose? Good to see you, my friends. Welcome, welcome. But the Egyptian calendar is going to be a big deal. It is pretty accurate. And it seems that by the time we get to the Ptolemaic dynasty, so this is after the Greek world had conquered Egypt under Alexander the Great, and they set up the Ptolemies, who were Hellenistic. There's a lot of advances of science that are happening during that time period, and one of the rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty, this guy named Ptolemy III, and he rules from 246 to 222, is actually going to recognize that the solar calendar that Egypt is using actually does need more frequent adjusting, right? Because of the concept of 365.25, right? They would, just sort of fudge that every now and then. But this is an interesting tablet here. This is the Canopus decree, and it's just a tablet that records the decree. So Ptolemy III decided that he was going to try to adjust the calendar, and he wanted to add a leap year every 4 years to level out the lunisolar calendar. They were running a pure solar calendar, but he knew that it wasn't 100% accurate, and he knew that there was that sort of 0.25 out there. By this point, the science had gotten pretty close. There were some Egyptian mathematicians that had gotten the calculation of the year down to like hours and minutes and seconds, based on things like math and rotation and revolution observations. These guys are really smart. Again, they were doing all this without telescopes. They were just doing it because they were really good at observing and knew how to do math. But anyway, the Canopus decree tried to add a leap year every 4 years, but he did it kind of silly. And the intercalary extra month that was at the end of the year, the little 5-day month, he wanted to add a 6th day to that every 4 years, but he made it literally about himself. So like one of the days was dedicated to Osiris and one was to Isis. This leap year month was supposed to be in honor of his memory. Now, he tried to attach this to one of the other household deities in Egypt after it didn't go over very well. But he wanted to be remembered every 4th year as the guy that fixed the calendar. And after his death, the it just sort of fell apart and people stopped observing it. And it's kind of funny that they were just like, okay, we'll pacify you while you're the pharaoh, but when you're gone, we don't want your special day. Right? We don't really care about, Ptolemy the Third Day. Anyway, but we're getting closer. So what about the Greek calendar? Now, this is something that a lot of people kind of like go off a little bit on a tangent, because there was not actually a Greek calendar. And a lot of people just assume that there was a Greek calendar. And in fact, the Greek concept of measuring time was a giant mess. It was chaotic. It followed dozens of different standards, and you could literally move from the territory of one city-state to the territory of another city-state that bordered it and be in a different month, a different day, a different year. The Greeks did not have standardized calendars. Every big city pretty much had one, and every region kind of had one that kind of overlapped. Now, during periods of time where one city-state might be very powerful and conquer a whole bunch of the other ones, it might be that they were able to enforce their calendar, but it's also quite frequent where a lot of people just don't pay attention. And even in big cities like Athens, now the Athenian calendar is one that a lot of people kind of freak out about. They're like, oh, well, if Athens had a calendar, it's got to be the good one, right? It's obviously Athens. Everybody thinks Athens is the good place, right? Their calendar actually sucked. The Athenian calendar was pretty bad. It was a lunar calendar, and it only had 354 days. And they didn't have any intercalary days to fix it. So they would literally just have to like reset their calendar every now and then. But a lot of people just assume like, oh, Athens, it's the cool place with lots of smart people. They're obviously going to have the best calendar. No, and there wasn't even one calendar in Athens. There were actually 3, and they all sort of worked at the same time. And if that sounds crazy, it's because it was. You had an agricultural calendar that was based on seasons and equinoxes and solstices and things like that. Then you had a government calendar, which was based on things like term limits. So the term limits were very frequently 10 months long. So you had a government calendar that wasn't even close to a year, like an actual, solar year. And then you had another calendar that was supposed to be like the actual lunisolar calendar that kept up with what day it kind of was. But at any given point, somebody might go, hey, what day is it? And then you'd have to go, what do you mean? Like, is it planting day that you're asking? Or is my term up day? Or is it month day? Like, which one are you talking about? And again, if that sounds crazy, it's kind of crazy, right? A better calendar than I could make? Yeah, sure. We still do. Yeah, academic year, fiscal year, calendar year, for sure. Tropical. We still keep a lot of that stuff going. But the biggest difference there is we today have a standardized year that everybody is expected to follow. And then these other things are elements of older times. Like the fiscal year still based a lot around agricultural stuff, right? If we're just looking at it. Which is perhaps even a relic of the old Attic calendar. So Attic here meaning Attic, region of Greece, the peninsula where Athens is located. But there was not a standard Greek calendar. They didn't have a default. You could go from Athens to Sparta and go through 4 different calendar zones. The only one that seems to have been accepted in any sort of wide array that had any potential like lasting impact was the calendar at Delphi. Delphi, of course, was the most important religious site of the entire Greek world for most of the classical Greek period. And the calendar at Delphi was used very frequently for things like religious ceremonies and particularly for holidays. So when it was down to the wire, and if you had to force somebody to pick a calendar in the Greek world that they could all agree on, the closest thing that you were ever going to get to was the calendar at Delphi. And we even see some people writing, and they'll include their local calendar date, and then below that or beside that they'll include the calendar date at Delphi. And that does happen occasionally when we're talking about business transactions, especially, and weirdly, specifically dealing with the buying and selling of slaves, because there was a rotational period at Delphi where you were expected to free slaves after a certain period of time on certain days, and Delphi was the one that kept the calendar for the manumission of slaves. So if you're going to sell something to somebody and give them a receipt for the slave that you are selling, you're going to include your day of your calendar, and then you're going to include the day according to the Delphi calendar so that you knew from which point to start counting for the term. So it's an interesting world in the Greek world when it came to calendars. This is not what a lot of people suspect. When you talk about Greece, a lot of people think, oh, like they are really close to us. They had their act together. They look at all the math that they knew. We have all this philosophy. We have all of this culture and these historical elements of our world that come from that time period. They clearly had a really organized calendar, and it was exactly like the one that we use today. And it really, really wasn't. Not even close. Not at all. Now, if we do want to get a little bit closer, we move a little bit further west, and we end up talking about the Romans. Now, the Roman calendar went through a lot of changes. A lot of changes. If we go way back to when Rome was first founded, or was even first as a culture, even before the kings, they were obviously using a lunar calendar, which is sort of like the most obvious one because it's easy to keep up with the phase of the moon, right? And according to legend, now we all know what that means, right? According to legend, there was a king named Numa Pompilius, one of the early kings of the 7 kings of Rome, that decided that he needed to fix the calendar issue because it was getting out of hand. And according to him, and according to legend about him, he was the one that built the lunisolar calendar that Rome used for the remainder period of the kingdom period in the early part of the Republic. Now, with a lunisolar calendar, you still have to do these adjustments, right? Because if you're just basing it on the phases of the moon, you're not going to have enough days. And if you're just basing it on the sun things, you're going to lose a lot of your cultural heritage, especially a lot of stuff like, your ceremonies and stuff like that. So you got to be able to be flexible. And the Romans would add stuff, but they would also drop stuff. It seems to be the case that in some of the early attempts at fixing the calendar, they added too much, so they would end up occasionally taking something away, like, oh, we need to skip ahead a few days. Or maybe we need to add a couple of days, and oh crap, we added 3 days, so now we need to take a day away, or something like that, right? It was just constantly having to be adjusted and nudged one way or the other. They didn't have a standard intercalary approach to fixing the discrepancy between lunar and solar. And eventually, this is going to get problematic. And by the time they got to what we might call like the early Republic, where things are really stabilized and they're starting to expand, they're going to start coming into contact with other people, and they're going to switch over to a purely solar calendar around the 450s BC. And purely solar calendars still have to be adjusted because, again, the year is not exactly 365 days long. But they didn't do a really good job of adjusting. Again, the Romans, they they had the right idea and they were moving in the right direction, but the adjusting of the year to account for that extra 0.25 days was just not something that they picked up on pretty early. This might have been that nobody else was doing it based on that the same way. This would have been maybe a copy of the Egyptian stuff, maybe something from the Greek world. It's really, really hard to tell where a lot of these influences came from. But anyway, somewhere around the 450s, they adopted this solar calendar, and instead of doing leap years, they would occasionally just wait for it to get really, really bad, and then they would add a whole new month. And the month would usually go between February and March. So instead of having a leap year, they might wait for, literally 30 or 35 years or something like that, and they just have a whole leap month and just cram a whole new month into the calendar. Smarch. I don't know how to make a joke out of that. Did I say Hey Noger? Hey Noger. It's a Simpsons joke. See. Okay, so this is a giant gaping hole in my pop cultural knowledge because, and this might be blasphemous, I don't really like The Simpsons that much, and I haven't seen very much of them at all. I know that they've been on the air for now almost 30 years, the vast majority of my life, but I just never really got into The Simpsons. Wasn't really my thing. That's okay if it's your thing. Like I'm glad that it brings you joy if it brings you joy, but I miss a lot of the references that have become sort of deeply embedded into pop culture, and I have to go look up the clips where the things were established so that I can fill myself in. So I'm going to have to go look up Smarch so that I know what that is next time I see it. Watch up to season 10, ignore the rest. Everything else is bloody awful. What up, Angel? How's it going, man? It's good to see you, Angel. I hope that you're doing well. It's been a while. I'm sure we can find at least one chapter you would like. Yeah. I mean, I know that there's a lot of stuff in there, but at a certain point, there's just too much for me to dig through, right? With 30 seasons or 34 seasons or something like that, with each season having, like 23 or 24 episodes, that's way too many. That's way too many episodes for me to try to go through. I just don't want to. I would rather rewatch a show that I've already seen than dig through a show that I don't know is going to be interesting. And I know that's really, really weird of me, but this is also the reason why I'm never going to start reading or watching One Piece. There are 1,000 episodes of that TV show, and I'm not ever going to watch them. It's just not going to work. I'm not going to do it. It was the 13th hour of the 13th day of the 13th month. We were gathered to discuss the misprinted calendar lousy smarch. Everyone has a different cutoff after season 6 or 8 or 10, but the writers gradually changed in the characters themselves. Yeah. What's up, Ivan Neo? Good to see you, my friend. Hummer was quite nuanced at first, but now he's just dumb for dumbness sake. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. And I think this is the same thing that kind of happened to South Park, which is another show that I know that everybody tends to love, but I just never really got into it. I know that it's a thing. I don't really want to watch it that much. A lot of it was very contemporary, and without the context of them making an episode literally week by week, riding the wave of the contemporary concept, it's going to lose some of the magic because I will have lost the context from 20 years ago, right? I mean, I know some of the jokes, but I don't know all of the jokes. Let's do shout outs. My friend Angel Hale is in the room. Angel's a gamer streamer, and you should go give Angel a follow. I know that he hasn't been doing streaming very much lately, but he'll probably be back, and you'll want to go watch him game. He's a delightful guy, and a pretty cool gamer at as well. I can't speak. I'm very tired. We've got Cave Geek Art, who's an artist that does art that you've probably not ever seen before because he's the only person that I've ever seen do it. burning into buckskin and is about to start working on a first Age of Middle Earth map, which I am so jealous of. We've got Nogur in the room. Nogur is one of the smart compadres that does the smart stuff on stream. Not that Angel and Cave aren't smart. They're incredibly talented at what they do. It's just that Nogur reads philosophy papers on stream and turns it into things that I can understand, which makes me go like, Nogur's way smart. So go hang out with Nogur. We've got Ivan Neo in the room, who I've started hanging out a little bit more in. Ivan Neo is also a philosopher, but also does a lot of stuff with like just like asking really good questions. Like, what is this? And how do we understand this? And some of it gets into like logic, and especially Ivan Neo is a big Bayesian, which is a whole like branch of that kind of stuff, which is interesting because I don't know if I necessarily completely agree. But you know, it's good to have people that think differently than you around you, because it keeps you constantly on your toes, right? You get stuck in the echo chamber intellectually, just like you do in the media as well, right? So you gotta spread the base, and you know good people when you find good people, and it's okay if you disagree on things that are like really esoteric, right? You know good people when you see them, and Ivan Neo is good people. You should go hang out with Ivan. Did I miss anybody? Who else is in here? Oh, we got my friend Tad, who does game streaming and Gundam streaming. Tad was playing old school RuneScape yesterday, and I forgot how involved that game is. Way deep. So also, you know, building Gundams, I clearly like that stuff as well. Oh, you're playing RuneScape right now too. There we go, right? I'm just background noise while Tad plays his games. So go give Tad a follow and hang out with Tad. Lots of cool people in the room. Humans' confirmation bias themselves too deeply if they don't have compadres that disagree with them regularly. Frank, I completely agree with that, right? And that's why I always go back to this. Like, you can build an echo chamber for yourself in the media, but you can build an echo chamber for yourself in an intellectual world just the same way. Just the same way. You can be the smartest bloke in the room, and if all you're doing is sitting around talking to people that agree with you, you're going to lose your edge. It's just the way that it works. Old school RuneScape. What year is it? If only I could fit in some... Oh, yeah. We've also got Lumpy in the room. I forgot about Lumpy. I apologize, Lumpy. You should go follow Lumpy Dragon Potato, who builds amazing things in Minecraft and talks good culture and talks good politics and good sense. And I go hijack his streams way too frequently, and bring up topics that are probably not best described on Twitch or discussed on Twitch, and especially not what a lot of his Minecraft people are expecting when they show up to see him build these amazing buildings out of bricks. And they're like, why is this weird guy talking about sociology in a Minecraft stream? He's just supposed to talk about creepers, and he's supposed to talk about the different mod packs and texture packs and things like that, right? No, you have fine opinions. Right? Anyway, I've got lots of friends that are on Twitch, and these people make the world better, and you should go hang out with them if you are interested, because they will make your world better, right? It's the 169th year of the Fifth Age. There we go. All right, so we left off before my rather long tangent about my friends that are lovely people, which was a completely valid tangent, by the way. The Republic is going to adopt a solar calendar, and they're going to go with the 365.25 day year. They're going to have months that are 30 or 31 days long, and they're going to shortchange February. And instead of having weeks like we do that are 7 days, they're going to have 9-day cycles. So their week is 9 days. And it's a little bit different. But what's interesting is that we actually do have some pretty cool records of their world here. So this is actually, if we're looking at it, an old Roman calendar. So this particular thing is called the Fasti Anitates Maiores, and it's basically the days of the month that are good for stuff. So what we're looking at here is a breakdown by months. So we have, if we look across the top here, you can see the month. So this is Jan or January, February, March, April, May, Junios or June. And this is a pretty early calendar because we don't have Augustus. We don't have April, May, June, August. We have Cineas, which is the 5th month, right? Which is what it was before we changed it to August. And then we have Sextus and Septembrus and Octoberus and Novemberus and Decemberus, right? Anyway, all of these little letters here represent different things. So each month begins with the day K. And in the Roman calendar, the first day of every month was the calends, which is spelled like this. Calends. So, oh yeah, I guess I did forget March, April, May, June. Oh yeah, so July. So this would have been Julius, and this would have been Augustus. So July and August. I apologize. Anyway, calends. This is where we get the word calendar from. Calends is the first day of every month. And then you see these days, the F's and C's and the N's. What these all stood for, and these are like specific days that had specific stuff. But a C day was a day where you could have civic action. So this is days where you could do political stuff. And the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H thing is their week. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then it starts over A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. You ever notice how September and October aren't 7 and 8? Well, that's because the Roman New Year was in March. So the first day of the year was in March, because March was the first month of the year. Because at the beginning of the year you marched out to go off to war. That's where March comes from, Martus, war, like Mars. So it used to be. I get the joke though. We'll talk about him in just a second. But anyway, so F is for Fasti, right? Which is where you could do celebration days, or you could have religious holidays. So a day that was listed as Fasti was a good day, but there's also non-Fasti, which is where you couldn't do things. You couldn't do civic action, or you couldn't do religious things, or you couldn't have votes or stuff like that, because that particular day was just marked as bad. Now, you can see other stuff here that kind of repeats itself over time. You have different festival days and different things, but you can also see down here at the bottom how many days each month had. So January had 31 days. February had 28 days. March had 30 days, right? So we're starting to see where our days of the year come from. Fasti, F-A-S-T-I. We get festival from it, yes. So this is a really interesting thing. This was on the wall of a building, and it was pretty clear that they would have painted this in order to keep everything straight. It was up to the religious organizations in Rome to set the calendar for the year, and then they would sort of promulgate it out to the rest of the people in the Roman world. But we're getting closer, right? We're not completely there yet, but we're getting closer. Now, the Roman calendar is going to change, and we got the joke with a guy named Julius Caesar. This is where we get the Julian calendar. Now, by the time Caesar got to power, because of the Romans not keeping up with when they should add and subtract, the calendar had drifted a lot. And specifically, days that were supposed to line up with certain solar events were happening in the wrong months. Like, they were like that far away, like not even just a day or two off, but like months off. And Caesar really figured out that we've got to change some stuff. We've got to organize things. We've got to set the calendar back to right, and we've got to make up an organized, standardized way of adjusting based on the fact that the year is 365.25 days long. So the Julian calendar is going to come into power in 45 BC as a decree from Julius Caesar that would set the particular time period for all of the rest of the Roman world to follow. The leap year gets added every 4 years on the year, regardless. Now, that's going to be a problem itself. Eventually, what we're going to talk about here in just a second is going to add up over time. But this is going to be the big one, right? When Rome switches to the Julian calendar, so much of the ancient world follows along. And for the next 1600 years, the Julian calendar is really going to be the way to go. It's not until the 1580s that it changes. What did the Romans ever do for us, right? I mean, other than water and roads and and safety and trade. What had the Romans ever done for us? It was very forward thinking of the Romans to create an MLK Day, right? Yeah, I guess. Give them something to think about, pretty much, right? Good to see you, Viper. Glad you popped in. You bought this stream, right? Have you been here since the beginning? What up, Soft? How's it going? Welcome, welcome. So, the Julian calendar is a big deal. It's very powerful. It's very, very influential. And the Western world adopts it pretty much wholesale. Now, there are obviously holdouts. They're not going to be like universal acceptance of this structure, but it is big enough that it becomes the calendar of the church, which of course is going to be the big deal, right? When the church gets stuff in their hands and they start especially using the Julian calendar to establish feasting days for the religious schedule, oh boy, that's a big one, right? Because we all know that the Catholic Church appreciates their saints' days and their feasting days, and they're going to use that for, again, all the way up into the 1580s. And at that point, this guy is going to show up. So this guy is Pope Gregory the 13th. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. Frank Big Time, thank you so much for the gift sub to Soft. Much appreciated, my friend. Soft, welcome to the adventure. You are now Spartacus. Enjoy all of the lovely access to those emotes. Anyway, Gregory the 13th. Over the course of the intervening 1600 years, the calendar had drifted some. Because again, the actual length of the year isn't 365.25. It's 365.2425, which I know sounds like this narrow shave of a difference, but when you multiply that over 1600 years, right? That's a lot of time that sort of accumulates. And by the time you get to Gregory the 13th, the calendar was off again. And it wasn't off as bad as it was when Julius Caesar took over. It was only like basically a week off, more or less. And what Gregory decided to do was use the knowledge of his time, use the math of his time, and figure out a way to make it work better. And this is the Gregorian calendar, which is the one that we're still on right now. And he's going to institute the leap year on a very specific formula. And I know that everybody says, oh, the leap year is every 4 years. But it's not every 4 years. It's every 4 years except years that are divisible by 100. Unless that year is also divisible by 400. And then you're like, what the crap does that even mean? Holy crap, what? Right? So, as an example, we will do leap year every 4 years, right? So every 4 years we add 1 day to the end of February, and that is, yeah, it was, well, they had messed up a little bit of stuff. I think it was actually 9 days off, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that they fast forwarded through October, and they fast forwarded like from the 5th to the 14th or 5th to the 17th or something like that. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't off really, really horribly, but it was off, right? So here's how it goes. Every 4 years, we do leap year. So in year 4, we would have done leap year. Now, when we get to year 100, 100 is divisible by 4. But you skip that leap year. You don't do that leap year. You don't do it in the year 200 either. You don't do it in the year 300. But in the year 400, that counts. And you're like, oh, okay. Okay. So then you don't do leap year in 500, 600, 700, but you do it again in 800. So this is why when we got to the year 2000, 2000 was a leap year because it's divisible by 400, right? So it's every 4 years, plus 1 day every 4 years, minus 1 day every 100 years, plus 1 day every 400 years equals 0.25 minus 0.01 plus, yeah, exactly, 240. Yeah. Thanks, Frank. Frank's actually like, I do math, let me show you. So that's where the 0.2425 gets kicked in, right? So it's a very elegant solution, and it has been what we've used since then. And at this point, our calendars are so accurate that we are down to adding things like leap seconds, because we've calculated the exact length of the year and our exact time down to the point where we're having to, at this point, adjust for the fact that the rotation of the Earth is slowing down. So we have a pretty accurate calendar now. And with the adjustments of Gregory, we have one that is probably going to last for a really, really long time, because it's really good at what it does. So if you ever wondered how our calendar became the thing that everybody uses, this is why. Now, it's also fair to note, this is the history of Western calendar stuff, right? There are other civilizations that have other calendars still, right? There are multiple different places of the world where they have sort of the understanding that the world says that it's this year, but then they have their own personal year. The Jewish calendar, for example, is still based around a lunar structure. The Muslim calendar is still keeping years based on dates in Muhammad's life. And then there are still some cultures that do things like regnal years, which is based on the rule of the king. So, like right now, we are in the early years of a new era in Japan, because when Emperor Naruhito assumed the throne, this started a new regnal era. And, so it's like, I think year 2 or 3 of his reign. I can't remember exactly when he took over, because it was pandemic brain hit me. I think he took over in 2019. So it might be year 4. I'm not sure. But anyway, there are still regional times that have their own calendars that are important to them, based on religious or cultural standards. And it should not be assumed that just because this is the church calendar that came up with, that was come up with by Christians, that's the reason why it won. The reason it's used so much is because it's accurate as heck, right? And this sort of gets back to the question that we asked a little bit earlier on, like, what happens if one culture conquers another? Well, European people did a whole bunch of conquering and they brought stuff with them, and a lot of other cultures have gained their independence from those European empires, but what stuck was, the calendar. Sometimes the religion, and sometimes driving on the wrong side of the road, but also the calendar, right? All I did was ask Shane what time it was an hour and a half ago. Well, I answer questions in very long-winded fashions, but that's what I do, right? That's why people ask me questions to begin with. So it's Greg's fault that you have to experience objective time. This is correct. Well, we can't blame objective time on him, because objective time exists regardless of whether or not you like it, and regardless of whether or not you agree to it. So that's the thing about objectivity. It's there whether or not you like it. Right? You just got to endure. Now, you can have subjective experience within that objective time. Junk, you can make your own calendar that's based around your own number of days and your own days of the week and months of the year, or you can just do away with months and give each day a name, or something like that, right? So you could do that on a subjective level, but the fact that it takes this long for the sun to move around, or the Earth to move around the sun, we can't really do very much about that. Or the fact that it takes this long for the Earth to rotate on its axis, we can't really do too much about that. Isn't it interesting how time can feel faster or slower depending on how you are living your life from day to day? Yeah, exactly. Do you know about the Spanish lady who did an experiment living in a cave for 500 days? I've heard about that. I have not read anything that she has written about her experience. I know that she was down there for a long time. And from one of my weird tangents, and I bet Ivan could speak about this a little bit more because he's really big on neuroscience. One of the reasons why time feels different in our heads is because of the fact that new experiences are interpreted as in our brain differently than repeated experiences. So if you're going through things that are very rote or very repetitive, your brain is going to record that period of time differently than it would if you were constantly experiencing new things. And one of the reasons why older people feel sort of like time is kind of crawling, or just like repetitive drag, is because they're not really experiencing a lot of new stuff anymore. They maybe have retired and every day turns into a copy of a copy of a copy. So that's sort of a neurological thing, but Ivan could probably speak more to that, and I would listen to Ivan before I would listen to me about stuff like that. Who do we have to blame for daylight savings time? Dusty Monk, welcome in, and great question. Daylight savings time is a creation of the modern world, and if we look at who was doing it first, it was actually pre-World War I Germany. And it was a way to run their military a little bit better. And the concept of daylight savings time has been through so much ups and downs. The original justification had to do with the agrarian leaning of jobs in America, where especially when students were required to attend school after that being mandated by the federal government, you would lose hours of daylight from your hired/birthed help, which are your children. And originally speaking, it was supposed to serve some level of benefit to agricultural means and be also a way for people to gain access to more hours of daylight, which would then save electricity. That was a sort of an underlying thing. And over the course of time, it's been also argued that you don't want your kids standing out out waiting for the bus in the dark. That's been an argument that we've used to keep daylight savings time around. Honestly, the last time it came up in Congress, one of the biggest groups that lobbied to maintain daylight savings time was candy companies. And you might not make this connection, but they spent millions and millions of dollars lobbying Congress because they did not want it to get darker on Halloween, because they wanted people to buy more candy, and they spent millions of dollars lobbying Congress against getting rid of daylight savings time because they wanted to make sure that there were more hours of trick-or-treating. And I'm not joking. This is legitimately one of the reasons we still have daylight savings time. I think it's an atrocious thing. I think we should just go to straight year-round what time it is. And that's not a very widely held belief. A lot of people would prefer year-round daylight savings time. I would not. I just want it to be what time it is, and that's the way that I think we should go with it. In 2150, we switched to star dates. When she came out, she thought she had only been there 170 days. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's a massive contraction of time. What's the official neo-cult calendar? Dude, I don't know. Look at Tad. Look at Tad, drawing the program there. You've declared your variable well, my friend. So we have leap year equals year where it is 4 and year that is divisible by 100 excluded, but also year where divided by 400 is included. So there we go. Good times. Should we make our own calendar with blackjack? Well, maybe. You could do that if you wanted to. Capitalism is to blame for daylight savings time. True. You were too adult. The first thing you thought was, well, that lady's tax situation is going to be a mess. Maybe so. Halloween. It is correct. It is Halloween. You condone this candy lobby. There we go. As I recall, in the 70s, being able to golf later in the day was used as a reason to keep it in subcommittee meeting. Alas. Alas. I don't think I could design a better calendar. I think that we've got one that works really well. The only thing that I would do to make it even slightly better is to take 2 months that have 31 days and give those days to February so that we had either 30 days or 31-day months. And if we took 2 days that had 31 days and we took 1 day away from them to knock them down to 30, you could then evenly distribute the 31 month days across the year, and that to me would be more comfortable. But you can't, I don't think we can change the current leap year structure. I think mine would mostly be set dressing and how we address the concept of months. We've got a really elegant system with the Gregorian calendar, and I like that a lot. You hate getting up in the dark and you like having daylight after work. Yeah, and a lot of people that I know are that way. My wife hates when it gets dark early. So T equals 0 at Big Bang in the milliseconds in a logarithm. Yeah, but that's working backwards on a big scale, and I don't know if we could really do that. All software in the world would shatter. It would absolutely shatter. It would break the entire structure. It would be worse than Y2K. Do we really need months? Do we need months? Not really. Functionally speaking, we don't even really need weeks. Days are the big ones. The reason months still exist is because of inertia. Cultural inertia. It is just easier for us to keep things the way that they are than it is to change them. because changing the structure to get rid of months and weeks would just it would wreck the world. It would destroy every computer code that there was. Everybody would freak out and go crazy. I don't think we're going to get rid of months or years. It's dark when you get up most days, so that doesn't bother you. Sure. Of course, we could change all the school and store opening times as the months go by. We could. The 2036 overflow is coming. It is. But I think we know about that one enough that people are going to be able to head it off at the pass, sort of like what happened with Y2K. 7 months, each with 7 weeks, and a 3-day holiday between each, with New Year's Day and Leap Day separate from the whole thing. 7 months each with 7 weeks, and a 3-day holiday between each. Would I still get weekends on that? Because if I didn't get weekends and I had to wait to a 3-day holiday, I couldn't work 7 weeks straight without a weekend. Yeah, Junk Collector, I know that the actual computer code does, but stuff like our entire bookkeeping structure, like our pay structures that we use in business that spit out paychecks, it's all based on a calendar structure that we have. All of our stuff like our tax structure, like when we pay our taxes or when we get charged by quarter for taxes, it's all based on the modern month thing. So like it's the computers themselves wouldn't crash because they would know what they're doing, but the software that run on them would just go haywire. I think it makes sense to have names for the months because they are correlated with weather patterns and holidays. I dig it. I mean, we could talk about when the French Revolution renamed all of the months, right? And they tried to get rid of all instances of the Gregorian calendar because it was put out by the church and therefore it obviously couldn't be secular. But we kept the structure. We just erased all of the names and filled in our own names in the blank, right? Weekends don't really mean anything. You could negotiate a 5-day work week no matter what the calendar was. Weekends mean a lot to people that get off on the weekends. I mean, I get that your weekend is sort of an arbitrary designation, but yeah, I would want. If I had to work longer in the 4-day work week, I don't know if I would actually prefer it or not. I know that a lot of people want to do 4 10-hour days. I don't know if I want to do that. I think I might still rather do 5 8-hour days than 4 10-hour days. I've worked 4 10-hour days before, and that's a long time. That is a long time for me to work. My brain starts getting tired if I had to do that long. Like if I had to grade papers for 10 hours, holy crap, I don't think I could do that. I mean, I like the idea of a 3-day weekend, but I would like to do 4 8s. If I'm just being honest. I think that would be fine. Or 4 by 6s. I'd be down with that too, right? All right. Well, I'm obviously done with my material for the history of calendars. If anybody has any questions about stuff, we can continue to chat, or if anybody wants to redeem channel points, now would be a good time to do that. Otherwise, we'll start sort of looking at who we might go raid. The months are not consistently lined up with the moon phases. Yeah, that's right. That's correct, Cliff. We have uncoupled our months from the lunar cycle, and that happened when we switched from a lunar calendar to a lunisolar calendar, and then lost pretty much all effort when we went to a purely solar calendar. So now we ignore the phases of the moon as a timekeeper, and this is why the full moon might happen at any given calendar month, right? And sometimes might happen twice, right? You have the blue moon where you end up with 2 full moons in 1 calendar month. But right. You take before baits with a 20% pay cut in a heartbeat. I don't know if I could handle the 20% pay cut. You're happy with your 5x8s and 100% pay? Yeah. 4x5? Sure, why not? I mean, hey. There are a lot of countries that are starting to look at 4-hour work or 4-day work weeks. I know that Scandinavia did a pilot program, I think in Sweden, or maybe it was Norway. I can't remember which one. Did a pilot program with 4 8-hour days, and it turned out pretty well. In the modern world where we have a lot of automation, I don't know if it makes sense for people to have to work as much as they do now. I don't know if it does. I think that especially in certain countries in the West, and especially places like America, we have overvalued work, and we have turned it into a sort of badge of honor. Like, I put in 67 hours this week. Like, okay, but you killed yourself doing that, and your quality of life is declining, and you're not spending time with your family or having leisure time. So why do we glorify that so much? I think part of it is just the leftover good old Protestant work ethic, right? And I think a lot of it is propped up by this deeply held love of perpetual growth capitalism that we have, where you've just got to work a lot because we've got to get better. We've got to have better numbers than last time, right? If we could have 4 that are actually 8, I would have enough time to start up a second business on your own. But that's also a fool's errand, because it's not like I only work 5 8s now despite being my contract, right? Even on a 50-hour week, it's just unacceptable. Yeah, I feel you, right? The UAW is trying to get 4 8-hour days and a 36% pay increase. Problem is the automakers lose a day of production. Yeah, Moose, I get why they're arguing, but I also, 36% pay rate is a lot. I don't know all of the numbers, but I do know that the companies that are participants in the UAW already make pretty darn good money. And I'm not trying to say that I'm just against people getting raises. I think that we all need to get raises, especially in light of how much the inflation stuff is going. And I think that automakers make a crap ton of money that they could share on better percentages with their employees, especially the ones that are at the lowest of the low, who don't get fair wages as it is. But 36% is a lot. Just off the, it sounds like a lot. I don't know if it is or not. It doesn't seem like 10 hours should completely wreck the week, but it does. Yeah, I don't get it. But anyway, the pay raise they selected was because it's the amount the CEO pay increased over the line of the workers' pay. Ah, I see. Now, that's an interesting angle to take. If the CEO's pay went up this much, why didn't everybody else's pay went up or go up this much? I like that tactic as a recognition. I think that their messaging needs to be way better. I think they should probably say that much more broadly when they went on strike, instead of just saying we're going on strike and we're asking for that much more, because that would have been a much better, much more impactful statement. They're also fighting hard against electrification because electric cars take less people to build and service. Ah, interesting. But you have to build more of them, right? Because electric cars are sort of designed to die faster. Cue the Luddites VOD, right? I talk about the Luddites a lot, unfortunately. The media hasn't been good about portraying the strikes in a good light. That is for certain. That is absolutely for certain. It's the UAW. They're required to be 80% evil by volume. Alas. All right. Where are we going to go raid? I think we're going to bring our eyeballs to some people. go raid Nixolotl. We haven't raided Nix in a while. Nixolotl is a 3D designer and artist, and designed the lovely puppy head pat emote that we love so much here on stream. And friend of the channel, delightful streamer, is currently working on a new 3D model, which is just fascinating to watch. So we're going to go raid Nixolotl. When we get there, our battle cry, as always, is adventure. And if you have those lovely emotes, you can share them in chat. But it was a good topic. I'm glad that we got to do this one. This is one of those rare situations where it's like, hey, that sounds like a really weird thing that we could do. And then I go, hey, that actually is really interesting. We should talk about that. Sometimes it's like, we should talk about these weird things. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. But anyway, thanks, everybody. We'll be back around on Thursday, and we're starting a new phase and a new format. It's the same thing, but we're just doing it slightly different. But until next time, everybody, take it easy, have a good one, and I'll see you around.